Happy Veterans Day weekend, and most likely happy Monday. So today's lesson is going to be on temperature regulation, and how respiration helps in temperature regulation. We're first going to talk a little bit about the basics of temperature regulation, and then we're going to talk about how respiration helps in temperature regulation. So in terms of temperature regulation, there are two classes of organisms. One class of organisms is called Homeothermic Endotherms, and classically we refer to them as warm-blooded organisms. And an example of a warm-blooded organism is this little kitty over here. And so warm-blooded organisms use internal processes to regulate their body temperature. Basically, they increase the rate of their metabolic processes. And when you see the word metabolic processes, you want to think respiration, okay? So if they want to increase their body temperature, they increase their rate of respiration, and the AP exam uses metabolic processes to raise their body temperature, okay? And the body temperature, no matter what the temperature outside, if the endotherm is working correctly, the temperature will stay constant. For humans, the average body temperature is 98.6. Cats and dogs actually have a body temperature that's a little bit warmer. That's why they feel so warm to the touch. Their body temperature is around 99.5 on average, so they stay a little warmer than us. The opposite of a warm-blooded or homothermic endotherm, okay, is a poikilothermic ectotherm. These organisms we refer to as cold-blooded organisms. Most reptiles, lizards, these guys are cold-blooded, and they do not regulate their body temperature internally. There's no process that occurs inside them that makes them regulate their body temperature. Instead, their body temperature is equal to the body temperature of the environment. A lot of times, if these organisms want to warm up, they'll go into the sun to increase their body temperature, or if they want to cool down, they'll burrow into the dirt to cool down their body temperature. So this graph here at the bottom sort of displays this. So at the bottom of this graph is the ambient temperature, which is the temperature outside, and then on the y-axis here is the body temperature of the organism. Okay, the snake, which is cold-blooded, or in this category, it's an ectotherm, okay, you can see that as the temperature of the environment increases, the temperature of the body temperature of the snake increases linearly. They're basically the same. So when the ambient temperature, it's a little bit less, but because they lose heat to the environment, but the environment, they're not able to regulate their body temperature. While as the bobcat, you can see no matter what the ambient temperature, and then the bobcat is an example of a homothermic endotherm, you can see that no matter what the ambient temperature outside, the body temperature of the bobcat stays relatively constant. So now we're going to look at a set of data. On Monday in the lab, we're going to measure rate of oxygen consumption of peas to measure the rate of respiration. And remember, when you hear the word respiration, that means metabolic rate. So sort of metabolic rate and respiration sort of mean the same thing. So here we have an ant, okay? And here we have a mouse, and they've measured the rate of oxygen consumption, which is equal to respiration or metabolic rate, okay? And they've measured the oxygen consumption at different temperatures. So let's look at the first question. So the first question says, why can oxygen consumption be measured, can be used to measure the rate of cellular respiration? And the answer to that, which again, for these questions, I'm not going to write out the answers. You need to listen and write at the same time. Your brain works better that way when you have to listen and write. Okay, so if we take a look at why can oxygen in general be used to measure the rate of cellular respiration or metabolic rate, is that oxygen is a product of respiration. A reactant of respiration. Whoa, it's early. So oxygen is a reactant of respiration, and you remember it's used at the end of the electron transport chain to accept the final electrons that have been used to pump H+ into the intermembrane space. When oxygen combines with the electrons, it also combines with some H+ in the matrix to make water. But why we can use oxygen consumption as a measure of the rate of respiration is that it is used up as cellular respiration occurs. So the more that's used up, the faster the rate of respiration. So this question is really important. So how does temperature affect the rate of respiration affect the rate of or oxygen consumption in the ant compared to the mouse. So if we look at the ant first, okay, and we look at 5 and 37, we'll see that as the temperature increases, so here we're having the temperature increase. So as the temperature increases, okay, so does the rate of oxygen consumption, okay? And now we sort of need to think about why, okay? Well, if you remember, ants are insects, so they do not regulate their body temperature. So the rate of respiration is slower at lower temperatures, okay? Because the molecules don't move as fast. And if molecules don't move as fast, all the molecules, all the enzymes required to do cellular respiration, the electrons in the electron transport chain can't move as fast. However, when you increase the temperature, those molecules begin moving faster, okay? And then as a result, they can combine faster, the electrons can move faster, the electrons get to oxygen faster, and the rate of respiration or oxygen consumption increases. For the mouse, which is an endotherm, we sort of see the reverse. At cold temperatures, so at 5 degrees, the mouse is actually performing respiration faster, and at warmer temperatures, it actually slows its rate of respiration. Now, what's the reason for that? Well, at cold temperatures, endotherms use a signal transduction pathway in a hormone, which we learned known as thyroxine, to increase the rate of respiration. And the reason why they increase the rate of respiration is that we learned on Friday, or some of you on Thursday, that respiration releases not only stores energy in ATP, but also releases energy as heat. So, to warm the body up, or to keep the body at the mouse's regular body temperature, which I do not know what the normal body temperature of a mouse is, they increase their metabolic rate, or they increase their rate of respiration, to produce heat to maintain their body temperature. So you can see, if we look at the last question, question 3, explain the difference for this. Well, the mouse is different than the ant, because the mouse actively uses respiration, or the heat released from respiration, to maintain its body temperature when it's cold. So what I would sort of do now, if I were you, is I would sort of replay this section and make sure you've answered these questions completely, because I'm going to grade these questions as part of the homework. So this graph here shows, so this is a graph for an endotherm, or a mouse in the previous example. It shows external temperature on the x-axis, and rate of oxygen consumption, which again is a measure of respiration or metabolic rate. And we can see as the temperature increases, okay, the metabolic rate or the rate of oxygen consumption decreases, because we don't need the heat to maintain our body temperature. But at cold temperatures, the rate of oxygen consumption is at its highest because we're using the heat released in respiration to maintain our body temperature. Humans, or animals, or endotherms in general, feel the best at around between 30 and 40 degrees Celsius. At that point, sort of their metabolic rate is staying the same, okay? So they're neither sort of doing respiration to cool themselves off, or, to warm themselves off, or using energy to cool themselves down. So at this point here, they're not really using respiration at all. At hotter temperatures, oxygen consumption does increase a little bit, because they have to have energy sort of to cool themselves down. So they actually increase their energy production a little bit when it gets extremely hot, to use the energy that they have to start mechanisms that will cool themselves down. But sort of the most important part of the graph is sort of this part, which you see at cold temperatures. We increase respiration to release heat to maintain our body temperature, and as the temperature gets warmer and warmer and warmer, they don't have to do that as much, or they don't need as much heat to maintain their body temperature from respiration. Now we're going to talk about specific ways that endotherms regulate their body temperature, besides just increasing their metabolic rate or doing respiration faster. Down here is the electron transport chain, so in here is the matrix, and obviously outside is the inner membrane space. And one way that organisms can create more heat to control their body temperature is we're going to define the process, is they decouple, this is sort of an important word, they decouple H+ transport from ATP synthesis. From ATP synthesis. What does that mean? Okay. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you look at the picture, when organisms are really, 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 really cold, okay, they insert another protein into the membrane that lets H plus through. So now H plus has two options. It can go through the ATP synthase and store energy in ATP, or it can go through another transport protein, and instead of making ATP, when the H plus rushes through, all of the energy is released as heat. So by doing this, we're actually making less ATP from glucose, and more of the energy is rushing through this protein, which can't make ATP, and then more of the energy is released as heat, and therefore the organism can maintain its body temperature there. So instead of storing the energy in ATP when it's very, very cold, we're allowing the H plus to completely release the energy as heat by going through this protein, which can't make ATP, to maintain the body temperature. And this is called decoupling H plus transport from the ATP synthesis or from the ATP synthase. So here we're going to look at some other ways, I wrote them already, that animals, endotherms, maintain their body temperature when they're too cold. One is that they start to shiver, and shivering is really involuntary muscle contractions. And when muscles contract, they actually release heat. We're not going to go through the process of muscle contraction, but muscle contraction releases ATP, or uses ATP, and when you hydrolyze ATP, that releases heat. So by shivering, you're producing heat. Animals also increase their respiration rate, which we talked about, and that's controlled by the hormone thyroxine, which gets a message, if you remember, from the hypothalamus to increase the metabolic rate or increase respiration to produce heat. The other two methods, and I'm going to talk about one more in more detail on the bottom, is that animals that have fur, their hairs stand on end, and that traps warm air around the organism. That's why we get goosebumps when we're cold. We don't have as much hair as, say, a cat or a dog or a bear, but hair standing on end traps hot air sort of in the hair and keeps the organism warm, and that's why we get goosebumps. And last but not least, this big word here, vasoconstriction. That causes the veins and the capillaries to constrict or move into the body, so that the blood does not lose heat to the environment. So the veins get smaller, so in order to keep the heat that's in the blood in your body. So the last method that endotherms use to keep their body temperature is called countercurrent heat exchange. And let's sort of look at this is a dog's paw. Blood vessels that are carrying oxygenated blood from the heart contain warmer blood. Okay? And they run parallel or anti-parallel to blood that is colder and returning back to the heart to get oxygen. And they're very close together. And what this does is any heat lost by the hot blood, instead of being lost to the environment, is lost to the vein. Veins visit the heart. Arteries go away from the heart. So this is an artery. That's a vein. So instead of being lost to the environment, the heat is lost to the colder blood, and that keeps the heat within the organism. So here we see the blood vessels are not as close to each other. So here, instead of the heat from the artery, which contains warm blood that just came from the heart, instead of going to the cold blood vessel, it actually escapes, and heat is lost to the environment instead of going to the vein containing the cold blood, and therefore down here the temperatures are colder than they are down here. And then overall, the total temperature of the dog is colder. So countercurrent heat exchange helps maintain the dog's body temperature. Now, organisms, when endotherms are too hot, they also have mechanisms to bring down their body temperature. One is sweating, or panting, in cats and dogs that don't sweat, and that allows for evaporative cooling. Heat goes into evaporating the water, which, remember, is hard to evaporate because it has a high specific heat or a high heat of vaporization, instead of heating the animal up, and that cools down the organism. Another one is vasodilation, and it's the reverse of vasoconstriction. Here the blood vessels expand and go closer to the skin to allow heat to escape, and that's why you get red when you're hot, is that the blood is rushing closer to the skin to lose heat to the environment. And then lastly, you'll decrease your metabolic rate or decrease respiration, which will decrease the production of heat, so that you're not producing internal heat. That is the end.